Imagine being told your entire world is about to be steamrolled by an interstellar bully and you don't even know they exist. That was the situation for Earth. For 300 years, the Vorathaian Empire had the galaxy in a chokehold. That wasn't an exaggeration. It was a cold, hard truth baked into the minds of every living being across their 2,000-star systems. When the Vorathaians wanted something, they took it. That's why when they called a Galactic Council meeting with 47 different species, nobody was fooled. It was just a fancy stage for the Empire to tell everyone how things were going to be. Sure, they let everyone have their say, but the final vote was always a sham. Any planet that pushed back got hit with crippling sanctions or a blockade, if they were lucky. The man in charge, High Chancellor Vexith, looked like he was carved from a block of granite in pure arrogance. His species had skin the color of dark stone and eyes that held a faint, menacing red glow. His voice was a low rumble, like a far-off earthquake. Vexith's chair was ridiculously huge, perched on a platform that literally put him above everyone else. No one dared to complain. And today, he had a very special announcement. The other delegates nervously shifted in their seats, the silence in the enormous chamber thick with tension. You could feel it in the air. They all had a pretty good idea of what was coming. The Empire had found a new planet to conquer. Distinguished members, Vexith's voice boomed, needing no microphone. The Empire has made a discovery that will benefit us all. Our scouts have charted a new world on the galaxy's edge. We are calling it Sol 3, but its primitive inhabitants have another name for it, Earth. A few delegates leaned in, their curiosity piqued. A new world meant new resources to plunder and, of course, a mountain of new wealth for the Empire. If you were a good little subject species, maybe you'd get the crumbs from their table. Our initial scans, Vexith went on, show a world teeming with minerals and life, but more importantly, it's home to a species called humans. Our intelligence team just wrapped up their report, and frankly, what they found is, well, it's adorable. He gestured, and a massive hologram of a beautiful blue and green planet materialized in the center of the hall. The image zoomed in, showing cities and people going about their day, completely oblivious. As you can see, Vexith said with a smirk, the humans are laughably primitive. They've barely managed to poke their heads out of their own atmosphere. Their best ships still run on chemical combustion. I mean, can you believe it? That's like trying to cross an ocean in a rowboat. They actually think landing a few of their people on their own moon was some legendary achievement. A few of the delegates offered a weak, forced chuckle. Chemical rockets were ancient history, something you'd find in a museum. It was like finding a lost tribe that was still fascinated by fire. And get this, Vexith added, the humans don't even have a unified world government. They're fractured into nearly 200 little tribes, and they spend most of their time fighting each other over patches of dirt and shiny pebbles. Their most powerful weapons are these primitive atom splitters they call nuclear bombs. I suppose they're good for blowing up their own cities, but they're utterly useless against modern energy shields. More images flashed by, crowded cities and fragile-looking spacecraft. To the powerful beings in that room, humanity looked like a bunch of toddlers playing in a sandbox. Therefore, Vexith declared, his voice turning to ice, the Empire has decided that Sol 3 and its entire solar system will be claimed as Imperial territory. The humans will be offered one chance to surrender and serve us. If they refuse, we'll proceed with a standard military cleanup. Fleet Admiral Kreth has been assigned to lead the 7th Subjugation Fleet for this task. A hologram of the Admiral popped up next to the image of Earth. Kreth was even more terrifying than Vexith, his armor plastered with metals earned from centuries of crushing rebellions. His genetically engineered red eyes burned with malice. This was a warrior who had personally brought 9 species to their knees. He had never once failed. The 7th Fleet is comprised of 847 warships, Vexith stated coolly. That includes 6 dreadnoughts, 42 battleships, 150 cruisers, and all the necessary support vessels. Now, normally, for a planet that hasn't even discovered faster-than-light travel, we'd send maybe 100 ships. but Admiral Kreth requested the extra firepower to make a lasting impression. We want the humans to understand from the very first moment that resistance is completely futile. The representative from Thaxia, a small insect-like creature, timidly raised a claw. High Chancellor, is such a large fleet truly necessary? It seems excessive. Vexith's glowing eyes snapped to the Thaxian, who instantly retracted its arm. This is not about what's necessary, Delegate, Vexith growled. This is about sending a message to everyone here. The Empire's power is absolute. We can send almost 1,000 warships to deal with one insignificant little planet because we have tens of thousands more in reserve. Let this be a lesson to all of you. The Thaxian delegate practically shrunk into its chair. The message was crystal clear. We can crush anyone, anytime, for any reason. The operation will commence in 3 standard weeks, Vexith continued. The 7th Fleet is already gathering at staging point Gamma. Admiral Kreth anticipates the entire operation will be concluded in less than one of their Earth days. The humans will look up, see their sky filled with our fleet, and receive our terms. They will surrender. If they're foolish enough to fight back, their entire military will be annihilated in a matter of hours. After that, we begin our standard integration protocols. And everyone in that room knew what integration protocols really meant. The humans would be disarmed. Their planet would be stripped of every valuable resource. Their people would become cheap labor for the Empire. Their culture would be erased. In a single generation, Earth would be just another cog in the Imperial machine. This meeting is adjourned, Vexith announced. You will all be sent a live broadcast of the operation. The Admiral has graciously agreed to stream the event so the entire galaxy can witness Vorathean efficiency firsthand. I expect every one of you to watch, and to ensure your homeworlds watch too. Let it be a reminder of our strength and of the profound stupidity of defiance. With that, he turned and stalked out of the room, leaving the delegates in a heavy, suffocating silence. One by one, they shuffled out. In a quiet corridor, the Thaxian delegates scurried to catch up with the representative from Draxus, a giant, wolf-like being. Do you think they have any idea? The Thaxian whispered. The humans, do they have any clue what's about to happen to them? The massive Draxian shook his furry head. How could they? They're still beaming radio signals into the void, hoping for an answer. Well, an answer is coming, and it's the worst one they could possibly imagine. I almost feel sorry for them, the Thaxian said. I've listened to some of their old broadcasts. They sound so hopeful. They talk about peace and working together for the greater good. Then they're naive, the Draxian grumbled, though a hint of sadness touched his voice. The galaxy isn't a happy family. It's a food chain. The Voratheans are at the top, and the rest of us just try to avoid being eaten. The humans are about to get a very harsh lesson in how things really work. Well, at least they might survive, the Thaxian offered, trying to find a bright side. If they're smart, they'll just surrender. Perhaps, the Draxian delegate muttered, but I've studied their history. These humans, they're a difficult people. They're constantly fighting with one another, but they have this baffling, illogical pride. They might just do something incredibly stupid. They might actually try to fight back. In that case, they'll be wiped from existence, the Thaxian sighed. A fleet of 847 warships versus chemical rockets. This wasn't going to be a war. It was going to be pest control. The two parted ways, but all over the station, aliens were having similar conversations, most just thankful that the Empire's hungry gaze had, for now, fallen on someone else. Have you ever had to stand by and watch a huge bully back a tiny kid into a corner, knowing that if you even whispered a word of protest, they'd come for you next? That's exactly the sickening feeling twisting in the guts of dozens of alien species as they watched the live broadcast. They knew speaking up wasn't just a bad move, it was a death warrant. And if you think there was no way out of this, you have to stick with me. Because how this story ends is something no one in the universe could have predicted. Miles above, inside a fortress-like command center for the Vorathean elite, High Chancellor Vexith was in a holographic meeting with Admiral Kreth, whose colossal, shimmering image towered over the room. "The Council has been notified," Vexith said flatly. "They'll watch just like the regulations require." A few of them mumbled some phony sympathy for the humans, but not a single one had the courage to vote against the annexation. "Of course not," Kreth sneered. "Their terror is what holds the galaxy together. It's the natural order of things. Did you get a chance to look over the invasion plans I sent?" "I did. The fleet you've assembled seems a bit much." "I signed off on the extra ships because your logic was sound," Vexith admitted. "This whole thing needs to be a lesson in absolute soul-crushing force. Let the entire galaxy tune in and learn what happens when a lesser race doesn't pull its weight." Kreth's nod was sharp, radiating pure satisfaction. "The 7th Fleet will reach their solar system in exactly 3 weeks. We'll drop out of hyperspace right next to their 4th planet, that reddish, dusty rock they call Mars. From that position, we'll transmit our standard ultimatum in all their major languages. I've been studying their tech. They have this primitive worldwide network, an internet they call it. We're going to hijack the entire thing and plaster our message on every single screen they own, all at once." Vexith leaned forward, a flicker of interest in his eyes. "And what sort of response are you expecting from them?" "Total, unadulterated chaos," Kreth said, a vicious grin stretching across his face. "Their governments will be tripping over each other, pointing fingers and trying to figure out who to blame. It'll be a beautiful disaster. A couple of them might try to act tough, but their military experts will figure out pretty quickly that they are hopelessly outgunned. I give them 6 hours max before they're on their knees, begging us to accept their surrender." "And if they don't surrender?" Vexith asked. "If they don't," Kreth continued, "we'll start methodically turning their military installations into dust. A few smoldering craters where their air bases used to be should do the trick to kill their fighting spirit." "And if they're still feeling defiant after that?" Kreth's eyes lit up with a hunter's glow. "Then we move on to orbital strikes on their cities. Trust me, the second we turn one of their precious population centers into a mushroom cloud, they will break. Humans are ridiculously sentimental. Our psychological reports say they would never sacrifice their own people for a fight they have 0 chance of winning." "Excellent. Just remember one thing, Admiral," Vexith warned. "The whole galaxy has its eyes on us. Keep it clean, keep it fast, and make it absolutely horrifying. I want every single species watching this broadcast to be reminded that the Empire's power is final." "You have my word, High Chancellor," Kreth said with a perfect salute. "The 7th Fleet will deliver nothing less than total victory. And the humans? They'll just be a forgotten chapter in our history books. Just another primitive species that learned their place is groveling before the might of the Vorithaean Empire." The hologram fizzled out, plunging Vexith back into the cavernous silence of the chamber. He walked to a massive window, gazing out at the star-dusted darkness. Out there, in that endless black, the human race was going about its day, completely oblivious to the fact that its entire future had just been signed away. In only 3 weeks, their entire world would be turned upside down. Vexith felt 0 guilt, not even a trace. In his mind, the universe had one simple rule: the strong crush the weak. The smart rule over the simple-minded. The Empire took what it wanted for the oldest reason there is: because it could. It was the law of the wild, just on a cosmic scale. The humans were about to get a very painful education, and the rest of the galaxy would be watching, getting a stark reminder of why you never, ever challenge the Empire. 3 weeks. That was all the time humanity had left. The Vorithaean 7th Fleet tore a hole in reality, pouring out of hyperspace like a flood of pure darkness. 847 warships materialized near Mars, their pitch-black armor seeming to drink the light from the far-off sun. Each ship was a weapon of annihilation, designed for one purpose: absolute conquest. Their smallest ships were as big as a human aircraft carrier. Imagine a bully so big they could shatter worlds with a flick of their wrist. That's what was parked in our cosmic backyard. Their biggest warships stretched over 3 miles long, armed with enough power to crack a planet right down the middle. On the command deck of their lead ship, the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kreth watched Earth swell from a blue marble into a world ripe for the taking. His fleet moved into a perfect, terrifying formation around him, a silent testament to their power. What would you do if a force like that showed up, convinced you were nothing more than ants? Stick around, because you won't believe what happens next. "Fleet is in position, Admiral," an officer reported. "Jump was clean, all systems green." "Scan everything," Kreth commanded, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I want to know where every last human ship, satellite, and piece of space junk is. No surprises." The sensor officer's hands flew across her console, pointing the fleet's all-seeing eyes at the little blue planet below. "Scanning now, sir," she said. "Initial readings show a ring of satellites, very primitive stuff, mostly for communications and weather. We're also seeing chemical rocket launches from the surface, heading to what looks like a tiny orbital station." She paused. "Confirming 0 military ships outside their atmosphere, Admiral." Kreth allowed himself a small, cruel smile. It was just as their centuries-old intelligence reports had predicted. The humans were still splashing in the kiddie pool of space, with a dinky station and no real navy. No defense patrols, no warning systems. It was almost too easy. They were a sitting duck for any threat that came from beyond their own moon. "Patch me through to the Galactic Council," Kreth ordered, "and broadcast this on all public channels. Let the universe witness this moment of destiny." All across the galaxy, on the Central Council Station, and on the home planets of 47 different races, screens came to life. Trillions of beings were now watching the Voratheian fleet, a silent, dark promise of annihilation just hanging in space. In the Great Council Hall, delegates shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, bracing for what they knew was about to be a short, brutal display. "The channel is live, Admiral," the communications officer confirmed. "Attention, inhabitants of the planet you refer to as Earth," Kreth's voice boomed as the ship's computers translated his words into 17 of Earth's most common languages at once. "I am Fleet Admiral Kreth of the Voratheian Empire. Your world has been chosen for annexation. You are to halt all military operations and prepare for the arrival of our ground teams. You have 6 hours to broadcast your unconditional surrender. Comply, and your species will be peacefully integrated into our glorious empire. We will give you protection, we will give you guidance, and we will find a useful role for your world. But if you resist, we will bring you complete and total destruction. You cannot win, you cannot run. Your only choice is in how you survive. Obey and live. Resist and be erased. Your time starts now." The transmission cut out. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the officers shared knowing smiles. Their own experts figured it would take the humans at least an hour just to wrap their heads around what was happening. We were expecting them to freak out. Frantic messages, mass panic, maybe even some pathetic begging for a little more time. Instead, the reply came back in less than 2 minutes. It was just an audio file, no video, from someone calling themselves NORAD Combined Space Command. The voice was human, male, and sounded so unbelievably calm it was almost lazy. "Yeah, that's going to be a no for us. Stay right where you are outside of lunar orbit. If you cross that line, you will be fired upon. This is your first and only warning. NORAD out." For a solid 10 seconds, the bridge of the flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was dead silent. Officers just gaped at each other, totally stunned. And then, Admiral Kreth started to laugh. It was this deep, rumbling sound that filled the massive command center. "Did you hear that?" he bellowed, looking around at his crew. "They actually threatened us! A species that still uses glorified firecrackers to get into orbit just threatened the Voratheian Empire. They warned us!" He let out another huge laugh, even louder this time. "I have crushed 9 civilizations. I have personally given the order to turn entire worlds to glass. And these tiny insects think they can shoot at us?" All over the galaxy, nobody could believe it. In the Galactic Council chamber, delegates were fidgeting in their seats. The Thaxian ambassador leaned over to his Draxian counterpart. They said no. In under 2 minutes, they didn't even call a meeting. The Draxian whispered back, "They're either completely out of their minds, or they have no idea who they just picked a fight with." But back on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Kreth's laughter died in his throat, replaced by a sudden ice-cold rage. "Communications," the Admiral barked. "Send a message. Tell them they just made the single greatest mistake of their short, miserable lives. We are moving on their world, and our only terms are their immediate, unconditional surrender. Anything else, and we will burn their planet down to the bedrock." The communications officer started to say, "Yes, Admiral," but Kreth cut him off with a wave of his hand. "You know what? Never mind. We're done talking. Words are for equals, not for pests. All ships, full speed towards Earth. Form up for bombardment. It's time to teach these humans what happens when you defy the Empire." In perfect, terrifying sync, the giant fleet began to advance. 847 warships surged toward the little blue planet, a flawless, disciplined tide of pure destruction. The huge dreadnoughts made up the center, protected by layers of battleships and cruisers, while quick destroyers darted ahead like a school of hungry sharks. It was the perfect formation for smashing a weaker foe, a textbook move of shock and awe. "How long until we reach orbital insertion?" Admiral Kreth demanded. "At our current speed, 43 minutes, sir." "Perfect," he smirked. "Keep all sensors on maximum. If these little humans are dumb enough to launch one of their primitive rockets at us, I want to see it coming." But just then, the sensor officer's voice sliced through the quiet on the bridge, laced with panic. "Admiral, contacts! Contacts everywhere! Hundreds! No, wait! Thousands of new signatures are popping up all over the system!" "What?" Kreth shouted, marching over to the sensor station. "Where did they come from? Did they use faster-than-light travel? That's impossible. They don't have that kind of tech." The officer, her eyes wide with fear, stammered, "No FTL signatures, sir. They were already here. They were hiding. They're dropping some kind of stealth field. They were all around us, sir. Everywhere. Hiding in the asteroid belt, lurking near the gas giants, even tucked into orbit around Mars. We had flown straight into a trap, and we didn't even see it snap shut." On the main view screen, the tactical map was exploding with new contacts. Little red dots blinked into existence, first a handful, then hundreds and hundreds. Each one was a ship of a totally unknown design, spread throughout our solar system in what could only be a perfectly executed ambush. Across the galaxy, delegates from other species watched the live feed, completely stunned. The Thaxian representative jumped out of his chair. "How is this possible? Our intelligence said they didn't have a fleet that could even fly in deep space." All Kreth could do was stare, his mind scrambling to understand what was happening. Analysis. What in the seven hells are we looking at? What can these ships do? The answer sent a chill straight down his spine. "We don't know, Admiral. They're not in any of our records. Their energy signatures are completely alien. They don't match any propulsion system we know of. It looks like some kind of reaction drive, but the power it's putting out is insane, way beyond what a pre-lightspeed civilization should have. Sir, they're running cold, almost no heat signature at all. That's how they snuck right past our long-range scans." "Give me a ship count right now," Kreth demanded. "We're still counting, sir. The number is going up. 437 contacts. Wait. Now it's 612. Sir, more of them are dropping their cloaking fields every second." 600 ships against their 800. The odds were still in their favor, but this was a long way from the easy victory they were expecting. These humans weren't some backward species just figuring out how to get off their planet. They had been waiting. They had been getting ready. "Sir, we have a message coming in from Earth," the communications officer announced. "Put it on screen," Kreth ordered. The same cold robotic voice they'd heard before from NORAD echoed through the bridge. "Vorathion fleet, you were warned to stay outside of lunar orbit. You have now crossed our defensive line. You will immediately pull back to a position beyond the orbit of Mars, or we will open fire. You have 60 seconds to comply." Kreth's hands balled into tight fists. "Withdraw? They dare order us to retreat? Lock every weapon on the nearest human ship. All ships, prepare to fire on my command. We are about to teach these upstarts what happens when you threaten the Empire." The tactical officer spoke up, his voice careful. "Admiral, with all due respect, I really think we should be cautious. We have no idea what they're capable of. Maybe we should—" "Silence!" Kreth roared. "We are the Vorathian Empire. We don't be cautious with primitives. We don't back down. All ships, target the human fleet and fire at will." The Vorathian fleet unleashed a hurricane of firepower. A blinding storm of energy weapons lit up the darkness of space as thousands of plasma bolts shot toward the human ships. It was the kind of overwhelming force that could crack a planet's crust and vaporize entire navies. But the human ships just moved. They didn't glide or bank like normal spaceships. They moved in short, violent, jerky bursts, their engines firing in sharp, unpredictable patterns. The Vorathian targeting systems, which were designed to track the smooth, graceful arcs of traditional warships, couldn't get a solid lock. 90% of their shots zipped harmlessly into the void. The few shots that did connect slammed into the human ships, making their shields flare up. But these weren't energy shields like the Vorathians used. It was something else. It looked like layers of armor that literally boiled off when hit, sacrificing an outer shell to protect the ship's core. It was a brutal, almost primitive-looking defense, but it was working. "They're breaking formation, sir," the tactical officer reported, his voice strained. "They're flying completely at random. Our targeting computers can't keep up." And then the humans fired back. The first shot came from a ship that had been hiding in the shadow of Mars. It wasn't a laser or a plasma bolt. It was something much simpler and 1,000 times more horrifying. It was a solid chunk of metal launched by electromagnetic rails at 30% of the speed of light. A kinetic kill vehicle, just a big, dumb slug of metal moving at an insane speed. It hit the lead dreadnought, the Glorious Conquest, dead center. The ship's shields, designed to stop energy, were completely useless against a solid object moving that fast. The projectile ripped through the shields like they were tissue paper. It tore through 2 kilometers of armored hull, blasted through deck after deck, and smashed right into the ship's reactor core. The Glorious Conquest just vanished. Its reactor went critical, exploding in a silent, brilliant flash of light so bright you could see it from Earth. 5,000 Vorathian soldiers were gone in an instant. The shockwave from the explosion crippled 2 cruisers that were flying nearby. Over at the Galactic Council Station, the delegates stared at their screens, mouths hanging open in shock. The Draxian delegate whispered, "They destroyed a dreadnought with 1 shot. How?" But the humans didn't give them any time to think about it. More kinetic slugs came screaming in from hidden positions all over the solar system. They were cheap, simple pieces of metal, but at those speeds, they were unstoppable. Vorathian shields were useless. Vorathian armor might as well have been made of cardboard. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being torn to pieces by weapons the rest of the galaxy would have laughed at. "Evasive maneuvers!" Kreth shrieked, his voice cracking with fear. "All ships, scatter, break formation. We have to dodge these things." But the humans had planned for that too. As the Vorathian armada shattered into a million pieces of panicked chaos, the human ships punched through the gaps, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Once they were in range, they unleashed weapons we had never seen before. Missiles that could pivot on a pinhead, defying all known laws of physics, and warheads packed with nuclear fury that detonated right on the hulls of our ships. Up close, in the swirling dogfights, they used lasers powered by contained atomic blasts that carved through our armor like it was tissue paper. "They're everywhere!" the sensor officer screamed. "Sir, they're using the wreckage of our own ships as cover, hiding in the debris and ambushing us." All Admiral Kreth could do was watch in frozen horror as his magnificent fleet was dismantled, piece by bloody piece. These humans fought like demons. They had no honor, no formations, and no tactics he could even begin to understand. They were hitting us from impossible angles, using ghost signals and electronic smokescreens to sow absolute confusion. They were even sacrificing their smaller ships, throwing them directly into our line of fire just to give their heavy gunships a clear shot. "Signal a full retreat," Admiral Kreth finally choked out, his voice cracking. "All ships, pull back to Mars orbit. We have to regroup and... Sir, the humans are jamming our hyperspace drives. They're cutting off our escape." "What? That's impossible. They don't have that kind of technology." "They shouldn't, sir, but we can't make the jump. Any ship that tries is getting hit with a flood of critical system failures." In that single, stomach-lurching moment, Admiral Kreth finally understood. The humans had been watching them for years. They had taken apart Vorithaean technology, decoded their communications, and built a war machine designed specifically to exploit every single one of their weaknesses. They were trapped, stuck in a star system with an enemy they had arrogantly dismissed as primitives. The battle devolved into a brutal, terrifyingly systematic slaughter. Across the galaxy, every species tuned into the broadcast watched as their entire perception of humanity was torn to shreds. This was timestamp 0. The once unstoppable Vorithaean fleet was now just a panicked mess of burning ships, desperately trying to form some kind of defensive line. Admiral Kreth's orders were just frantic screams across the comms, begging his captains to fall back to their standard formations. But their entire playbook was useless. The humans had been studying for 40 years. They had watched every public broadcast of every victory the Empire had ever celebrated, and they had learned. This was supposed to be a simple show of force, but Admiral Kreth had been completely ambushed. The second his fleet dropped out of hyperspace, it was like the entire human solar system woke up and chose violence. Ships that had been hiding among the asteroids for decades roared to life, charging straight into the fray. What they thought were old, dead satellites around Jupiter suddenly lit up, revealing themselves as colossal railgun platforms. Even the rings of Saturn weren't safe, as camouflaged warships shed their icy disguises to join the attack. The humans hadn't just armed their world, they had turned their entire solar system into one giant trap, and the Vorithaeans had just walked right in it. At the 247-second mark, the battleship Pride of Empire finally landed a solid hit, atomizing a human frigate with a single plasma blast. The small ship simply vanished, its crew of 200 souls erased from existence. For a fleeting second, Kreth felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could still win this. On paper, this was supposed to be a complete blowout. The Vorithaean fleet was bigger, stronger, and light years ahead in technology. The humans were seen as nothing more than pests, staging a desperate and suicidal last stand. At least, that's what the Empire believed. But then, 6 human destroyers seemed to materialize directly out of the fireball of their own destroyed frigate. The horrifying reality clicked into place a second too late. The ship wasn't a loss. It was bait. They had dangled it out there, forcing the Pride of Empire to fire its main cannon and reveal its exact position. The moment it did, human targeting computers got a lock. The 6 destroyers fired as one, not with energy weapons, but with a tidal wave of missiles. Dozens from each ship, a swarm of over 100 warheads, all screaming toward a single target. The Pride of Empire's point defense cannons tried to fight back, painting the void with light, but they never stood a chance. A series of silent nuclear blossoms bloomed against the battleship's shields, cracking them wide open before the missiles chewed through the hull like it was aluminum foil. The very last warhead in the wave slipped through the chaos and buried itself deep inside the ship's reactor core. The Pride of Empire didn't even explode. It just winked out of existence in a flash of blinding white light, taking its 4 escort cruisers with it in the shockwave. The smaller ships were sent tumbling into the darkness, silent and dead. Billions of light years away, the races that had lived in fear of the Vorithaean Empire watched the broadcast, caught somewhere between utter terror and a dark, grim satisfaction. The Taxian delegate gripped his console with all 4 hands, his eyes wide. The Draxian next to him was trembling. "They're using strategies we couldn't even dream of," he whispered. The Draxian observer just couldn't wrap his mind around what he was seeing. "How are they doing this?" he stammered. Every ship is acting on its own, but they're all moving in perfect harmony. There's no flagship calling the shots, no commander to take out. It's like they're all connected. He was absolutely right. What looked like pure chaos to the aliens was actually a perfectly conducted symphony of destruction. Every single human ship, weapon, and sensor was linked into one massive shared combat network. They were seeing the battle through a million sets of eyes at once, their computers processing the data as a single mind, systematically taking the enemy fleet apart. It was a hive mind of wires and steel, a superorganism built for one thing: war. At the 512-second mark, the cold, brutal truth finally hit Admiral Kreth like a physical blow. He wasn't fighting some ragtag planetary defense force. He was fighting an enemy that had been preparing for this exact moment for generations. Every weapon they deployed was designed to counter a known flaw in Vorathean ships. Every tactic they used was a direct counter to a strategy he thought was a state secret. "All ships, break off the attack!" Kreth's voice, once a commanding roar, was now a strangled gasp of pure panic. "Fall back to Mars and get those hyperspace drives spooled up." His fleet scrambled to obey, ships turning and burning for the safety of open space. But you can't just vanish into hyperspace. The ship's navigation computer needs a full 30 seconds to calculate a safe jump. 30 seconds to plot a course that doesn't send you straight into the heart of a star. 30 seconds where you have to fly in a perfectly straight, completely predictable line for the drive to work. And the humans knew it. The Voratheans had bragged about their rapid jump technology on Galactic news for decades. The humans didn't just watch the ads, they built their entire military doctrine around that one tiny 30-second window of total vulnerability. The second any Vorathean ship straightened out for its jump, a new storm of human missiles screamed toward it. Every single ship that tried to run immediately became the #1 target. Kinetic slugs, nuclear warheads, and pinpoint lasers slammed into the helpless vessels, turning them into clouds of shrapnel, or sending them spinning uncontrollably into the endless void. "We can't escape and we can't fight back!" the tactical officer shrieked, his military training completely shattered. "Sir, they're just picking us apart. We've lost 43 ships in the last minute." All Admiral Kreth could do was stare at his display as the red icons representing his warships blinked out, one by one by one. This was supposed to be a show of overwhelming power, a quick and clean conquest. Instead, it was an execution. At the 833-second mark, the Vorathean cruiser, Infinite Victory, managed to score a clean hit, vaporizing a human frigate that got too close. A dark, vicious smile spread across the face of its captain, Threxus. Finally, a small victory. That tiny moment of triumph lasted for exactly 4 seconds. 6 human destroyers that had been pretending to retreat suddenly flipped around and charged. They had sacrificed yet another one of their own ships as bait, a tactic that, unbelievably, was still working. The humans just didn't seem to care about their ships the way the Voratheans did. To them, a ship was just a tool, a bullet to be fired if it meant taking a more valuable enemy piece off the board. It was a cold, brutal logic that was completely alien to the Voratheans, whose entire culture was built around the honor and glory of their magnificent warships. The destroyers opened fire at point-blank range. The Infinite Victory and its 3 escorts were torn to shreds from all sides at once, their shields collapsing, their armor melting away, and their reactors going critical in a chain of silent, brilliant flashes. In less than a minute, another 4 Vorathean capital ships vanished, their fiery skeletons joining the ever-expanding junkyard now circling the Earth. Across the galaxy, alien races glued to the live feed were starting to get it. This wasn't a fight. It was a message. Humanity was making a point. Having the biggest navy in the cosmos means zip if you don't have the brains or the guts to use it right. The Voratheans had bigger ships, sure, but the humans had a brilliant strategy, flawless teamwork, and a terrifying readiness to take a punch to land a knockout blow. Then, at the 1,109-second mark, Admiral Kreth's own command ship, the Eternal Dominion, took a direct hit to its nerve center. A kinetic slug launched from a human dreadnought slammed into the exact spot their intel said the admiral would be. The shell, moving at an insane fraction of light speed, tore through 30 meters of armored hull before its tactical nuke payload went off deep inside the command deck. Admiral Kreth had just a split second to realize his own epic failure. He watched the ceiling peel away like aluminum foil. He saw his bridge crew thrown about like rag dolls. He watched fire vomit from every console as the main view screen shattered, stealing the very air from his lungs. His last words, broadcast over an open channel for the whole galaxy to hear, were a strangled cry of pure, unfiltered fury. "How? You animals!" And then the reactor core of the Eternal Dominion gave way. This was the flagship that had crushed 9 rebellions and torched entire planets. People called it invincible. And then it just cracked into 3 huge chunks, dissolving into a glittering cloud of debris. Admiral Kreth and his crew of 12,000 were simply gone. The destruction of the flagship threw the entire Vorathean fleet into a blind panic. With no one giving orders, it was total chaos. Some ships tried to fight, others tried to bolt, and a few just powered down their weapons, hoping for mercy. The humans answered their prayers with more cannon fire. This wasn't about claiming territory, this was pest control, and every single Vorathean ship was on the extermination list. The human fleet wouldn't stop until every last one of those vessels was a cold, silent tomb drifting through the void. There would be no prisoners taken, no survivors to tell the tale, and no witnesses besides the stunned alien races watching from light years away. At the 1322-second mark, a lone Vorathean scout ship, the Swift Messenger, somehow managed to punch through the chaos. Its captain was a young officer named Keyleth, and he was at the helm of the fastest ship in their whole navy. Scout ships were built to run, not to fight. Keyleth redlined the engines, pushing them way past their safety limits as he raced for the edge of the solar system. All he had to do was escape the sun's gravitational pull to make a clean jump to hyperspace. He was so close. He was actually going to get out of this alive. The human fleet was tied up, busy ripping the bigger warships to shreds. They were too far away and too distracted to chase him down. Just a couple more minutes and he'd be home free. He would be the one to warn the Empire that humanity wasn't some pushover. They were a sleeping giant that had just been rudely awakened. He would tell them this whole invasion was a disastrous miscalculation and that everything they believed about these so-called primitives was completely and utterly wrong. And that's when a single human ship popped up on his sensors. It was coming up fast from behind Saturn's moons, moving at a speed that just shouldn't be possible. No ship could accelerate like that. The G-forces alone would have turned any living crew into mush. It was pulling off maneuvers that would rip a normal ship apart at the seams. For 300 years, the Vorathean Empire had been the undisputed top dog of the galaxy, and they figured Earth would be an easy conquest. But in the final horrifying seconds of his life, a pilot named Keyleth realized they'd made a deadly mistake. The ship hunting him wasn't being flown by a person. It was an AI-piloted drone, and it moved in ways no living thing could possibly survive. At 1358, it didn't bother firing a laser. It just rammed his scout ship, turning them both into a silent flash of light. But right before the impact, Keyleth got one final message out. It was a frantic cry for help, blasted out on an emergency frequency, a warning that would take years to crawl back to the Empire. And it was chillingly simple. Earth is not what we thought. They were ready for us. They were waiting. The fleet is gone. For the love of the Empire, do not come here. Just 2 minutes later, at 1400 hours, the last Vorathian ship, a crippled destroyer trying to hide behind Mars, was simply erased by a swarm of missiles. The captain never even had a chance to utter the words, "We surrender." Human computers just crunched the numbers, decided the damaged ship was a potential flight risk, and ordered its annihilation. And just like that, the war was over. 4 hours earlier, 847 Vorathian warships had swaggered into our solar system. Now, all that was left was floating scrap metal. The human fleet lost 63 ships, but every single one was a strategic sacrifice, like giving up a pawn to take the queen. The final tally was insane, a kill ratio of over 13-1. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, delegates from 1,000 different worlds could only gape at their screens in stunned disbelief. The Vorithian delegate was completely frozen, his eyes wide and blank. Imagine being the toughest bully on the playground for 3 centuries, only to get knocked out cold by the quiet new kid with a single punch. A Thaxian delegate was the first to speak, his voice a dry rasp. The Vorithian Empire. They've been in charge for 300 years. They've wiped out 17 civilizations and have never lost a major battle. And a species we all wrote off as primitives just annihilated their entire navy in 14 minutes. A grim-looking Draxian turned to him. "You're wrong," he said softly. "This didn't take 14 minutes. This started 40 years ago, the moment humanity first heard our radio signals. They've been getting ready this whole time. They had built their entire military in secret, trained their soldiers in the darkness of space, and turned their whole solar system into one massive, hidden fortress. And then they just waited, letting the rest of the galaxy think they were harmless." All of a sudden, a new message flashed onto every screen in the hall. The face of a human woman appeared, her words instantly translated for everyone to understand. Her message was short, and it sent a wave of cold fear through every single being in that room. "This is Representative Chen," she said. "As of today, Earth is off limits. Any ship entering our system will be destroyed. There will be no warnings. There will be no negotiations. Stay out of our backyard, and we'll stay out of yours. But if you show up looking for a fight, you will end up just like the Vorithians. This is your first and only warning." The message cut out, leaving the galaxy in a deafening silence that was now filled with a terrifying new truth. Humanity hadn't just politely asked to join the galactic community, they had kicked the door clean off its hinges. The council chamber was more packed than it had ever been. Everyone was asking the same question: what in the stars just happened? But the real question hanging in the air was, are we next? High Chancellor Vexith got to his feet, but his usual air of authority was gone. He looked plain scared. "The council recognizes the human delegation," he announced, his voice shaky. "We are here to demand an explanation for the events in the Sol system." In the middle of the chamber, a life-sized hologram of Representative Chen appeared. She was wearing a simple, dark blue uniform with no medals or honors. She was a small woman, with short hair and an expression that gave nothing away. She had the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards. "Hi, Chancellor," Chen started, her voice perfectly calm. "You say we owe you an explanation. I don't agree. We don't owe you anything. But to avoid any future confusion, I'll give you one." The Thaxian counselor, choosing his words very, very carefully, asked the question on everyone's mind. "Representative, our intel suggested your people were centuries away from faster-than-light travel. You had no energy shields, no plasma weapons. How did you possibly defeat a fleet that had all of that and then some?" Chen actually smiled, but it was a cold, sharp thing. "Counselor, your question gets to the heart of the mistake you all made about us. You scanned our gadgets and thought you understood us. You saw our chemical rockets and nuclear power and dismissed us as children playing with building blocks. You were wrong." A timeline appeared next to her hologram. 40 years ago, our radio telescopes intercepted your broadcasts. We heard the Vorithians bragging about their conquests and planning their attacks. We learned 2 things that day. First, that we weren't alone in the universe, and second, that our cosmic neighborhood was run by a bunch of gangsters who wiped out new species like ours for fun. A nervous energy filled the chamber. You could feel it in the way the delegates shifted in their seats. Many of them had rubber-stamped those very same Vorithian pacification campaigns themselves. Chen went on. "So for the first time in the history of our world, every single nation agreed on one thing: we would not be next on their list. We decided to get ready for the day. The Vorithians came knocking." A Draxian general, his voice dripping with disbelief, interrupted. You prepared for 40 years for one battle? How could you possibly keep a secret that massive? It was easy, really, Chen said. We just went silent. We shut down all our deep space signals. We stopped sending out friendly hellos into the void. To the rest of the galaxy, we looked exactly like what you thought we were, a backwater planet, totally clueless about the universe. You had zero idea what we were creating in the dark. The hologram flickered, showing giant shipyards hollowed out of asteroids and huge military bases built on the far side of the moon. We poured 15% of our planet's entire economic output into one defense initiative. We built our fleets where your sensors would only see rock and ice. We trained entire generations for a war we prayed would never happen. And every last part was designed to be completely invisible to you. But your technology, Vexith, the Vorathian delegate blurted out, his voice cracking. Your weapons were just chunks of metal. That's ancient history. They shouldn't have been able to put a scratch on our shields. Chen's eyes locked onto the broken delegate. We watched you, High Chancellor. For 40 years we listened. We studied every single battle you fought. We downloaded your ship designs, your shield frequencies, your armor specs, your battle plans. You were so drunk on your own power that you broadcast your deepest secrets for the whole galaxy to hear. She let the silence hang in the air. You literally gave us the user manual on how to beat you. Your shields are amazing at stopping energy blasts, but they barely slow down a solid piece of metal moving at a third of the speed of light. Your armor can take a plasma hit, but it cracks like an eggshell against a massive kinetic strike. We didn't play by your rules. We invented the perfect countermove. The Thaxian counselor spoke up again, his voice now shaking. You said kinetic weapons. To get something moving at 30% of light speed, the power required would be staggering. How did you manage it? Your ships didn't even have modern shields to survive the launch. We don't use shields like yours, Chen replied, her voice firm. We have something called ablative armor. It's messy, it's cheap, and it works like a charm. When your plasma cannons hit our ships, the outer layers just burn off, soaking up the energy and keeping the inside safe. It's that simple. A lot of our tech is simple, Counselor. That's why it's so good. It's dependable, easy to crank out in factories, and doesn't need any fancy, rare materials. On the screen, a human warship appeared. It was a clunky, ugly brick, built for war, not for show. Our ships are stubborn. They're layered with backup systems. You take one out, and 3 more kick in to take its place. If a piece breaks, you can slap a replacement in within seconds. I know they're not as pretty or graceful as your star cruisers, but they get the job done. And while you were all busy polishing your ships, we were building thousands of ours. A wave of pure shock washed over the chamber. It was like a light bulb flickered on in every mind at once. An entire species, backed into a corner, had secretly transformed their home into a fortress, and not one of the galactic superpowers had any idea. A delegate from a small species called the Yark stood up, his voice trembling. Representative Chen, your methods were brutal. You used your own ships as bait. You sent your people on suicide runs just to destroy one of our dreadnoughts. You didn't offer surrender, and you didn't take any prisoners. Is that just how your kind makes war? Chen's face was like stone, giving nothing away. Yes, she said, her voice flat and empty of emotion. When we fight to win. We don't give a damn about glory or what you call honor. We fight so we can live to see another day. Every pilot who climbed into a cockpit for that battle knew they probably weren't coming back. They signed up anyway because they knew what we were up against. If the Vorathians had won, Earth would be just another slave world. Our children and their children would have been born into servitude. We made a choice. It's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. Her eyes swept across the room, pausing on the delegates from worlds that had already knelt to the Empire. I'm sure some of you think we're monsters, but think about this. We gave Admiral Kreth a chance to walk away. We told him to take his fleet and go home, but he just plowed ahead, absolutely certain he couldn't lose. He saw us as primitives who would just fall over for him. He was wrong, and his arrogance cost him his entire fleet. The Draxian observer leaned in, his voice a low rumble. But your stealth tech? How on earth did you hide thousands of ships from their deep space scans? Chen's answer was almost insultingly simple. Basic science. We designed our ships to run cold with almost no heat signature. We used passive sensors until the very last moment. We parked our fleet where your scanners would never look twice, inside the asteroid belt, mixed in with the rings of Saturn, even on the dark side of our own moon. We were hiding in plain sight the whole time, just looking like cosmic junk. You were looking for powerful battleships with shields blazing and engines glowing, she continued, a faint, chilling smile on her lips. You weren't looking for quiet, patient hunters waiting for the right time to pounce. You thought your fancy tech made you unbeatable, but we had patience and a strategy. We spent 40 years doing nothing but watching you, memorizing your every move. We became the galaxy's foremost experts on Vorathaean military tactics without ever firing a shot. By the time our first missile was in the air, we already knew how you would react before you did. The High Chancellor Vexith's red eyes burned with a rage he could hardly control. You call it defense, but you wiped out an entire armada. 12,000 Vorathaean soldiers died in that battle, he spat. Their only crime was obeying orders to expand our glorious empire. Chen faced him, her voice dropping to a freezing whisper. Their crime was trying to steal our home. High Chancellor, they showed up at our house with 800 warships and offered us two choices, surrender or die. They swore they would turn our cities into glass if we resisted. What did you seriously expect us to do? Greet them with a parade? Thank them for the honor of becoming your slaves? A dead, heavy silence crushed the great hall. Vexith was speechless. Chen pressed on, her voice tight with fury. And let's get one more thing straight. For 40 years, we've been listening to your Galactic Council meetings. We heard all 47 of you talk about the Vorathaean expansion. We heard you politely describe it as subjugation operations. We watched you vote to officially accept conquered worlds as part of your empire. And not one time, not a single damn time did any of you say no. Not one of you ever found the spine to stand up and suggest that maybe, just maybe, the Vorathaeans ought to be stopped. Her gaze raked across the chamber again, and one by one, the delegates looked away, unable to meet her eyes. You all knew exactly what the Empire was. You watched them devour planet after planet, and you did nothing. You were too afraid, too spineless, or maybe just too comfortable to risk doing the right thing. So don't you dare stand there and lecture me about the lives we took to defend our own freedom. You had 40 years to make something better. You just chose to live on your knees instead. The Thaxian counselor finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. You are not wrong, Representative Chen. We should have done more. We should have resisted, but the Vorathaean Empire was it was too powerful. None of us could have fought them alone. Then you should have fought them together, Chen snapped back, her words like broken glass. There are 47 species in this council, billions of souls on thousands of worlds. If you had all stood together 3 centuries ago, the Empire never would have grown into the monster it is now. But you didn't. You picked the quiet life of a servant over a free life that was worth fighting for. She let her words sink in before her voice shifted, becoming cold and absolute. Earth will not make the same mistake. We are not joining your council. We want nothing to do with your politics. We will never again trust our survival to anyone else. As of right now, we are claiming our solar system and a 50 light-year buffer zone around it. Any ship that enters that territory without our explicit permission will be considered an enemy and will be vaporized. There will be no warnings. There will be no second chances. 50 light-years, Vexith stammered, his face a picture of sheer disbelief. That territory includes 17 star systems. You can't possibly hold a space that large. For the very first time, a real, almost amused smile touched Chen's lips. Can't we, High Chancellor? You also thought we couldn't defend one tiny planet. You thought 800 warships would be more than enough to make us kneel. So how did that whole keeping humanity in its place thing work out for you? She gestured to the star map, where a new, enormous red sphere marked humanity's territory. For 40 years, you scanned our solar system, and all you ever found were our primitive little chemical rockets. You somehow missed the orbital shipyards. You never detected the cloaked weapons platforms. It never once crossed your minds that we were quietly preparing for total war. What on earth makes you so sure you know what we've been building in the star systems right next door? A deep, cold dread filled the chamber. If the humans could hide a secret war machine in their own backyard for 4 decades, what could they have possibly built in the neighboring systems that no one ever bothered to visit? How deep did this rabbit hole actually go? We have automated defense platforms guarding the entire exclusion zone, Chen said, her voice flat. They've been sitting in there, silent and dormant, for the last 20 years. You never noticed them because you weren't looking for them. These platforms have one simple directive: eliminate any vessel that isn't authorized. They don't send warnings. They don't open negotiations. They simply erase the threat. She waved her hand, and the map vanished. Then she looked at the shell-shocked delegates for the last time. Humanity is now officially withdrawing from all galactic affairs. We don't want your trade agreements. We don't want your military alliances. We want nothing to do with your politics. We just want to be left alone. Stay on your side of the line and we'll stay on ours. But if you cross it, you'll end up just like the Vorathayans. But what if we need your help? A tiny voice piped up. It was the delegate from Plinix, a planet the Vorathayans had crushed 200 years earlier. What happens when new empires rise from the ashes? Now that the old empire is broken, will you come help us? Chen's gaze fell on the Plinix delegate, and for just a second, a flicker of something that looked like regret crossed her face. No. Earth's policy is isolation. We will not get dragged into your conflicts. We are not your saviors. You need to save yourselves, build your own ships, forge your own alliances, create that peaceful galaxy you always talked about, but do it on your own. Her voice softened almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry, but humanity learned a very painful lesson. We can't trust anyone else to protect us. We can't depend on treaties or councils. The only security that truly matters is the strength you build for yourself. And for that reason, Earth is now closed. The very last thing the galaxy's most powerful leaders ever saw of a human was the shimmering hologram of Representative Chen. Her voice was perfectly calm, but it sent a chill through the council chamber that froze everyone in their seats. This is the first and the last message humanity will ever send you, she announced. Don't try to call us. Don't send your diplomats. And if you value your lives, do not even think about entering our exclusion zone. We have nothing left to say. Just remember what happened to the Vorathian 7th Fleet and stay away. With that, her image winked out of existence, leaving the most influential people in the galaxy sitting in a stunned, terrified silence. It had only been 6 months since the 14-minute war, an event that didn't just win a skirmish, it completely shattered the galactic order. The Vorathian Empire, the iron-fisted rulers of space for 300 years, were utterly and completely broken. Can you possibly imagine being forced to live on your knees for 140 years, only for someone to suddenly tell you it's finally okay to stand up again? That's exactly what it felt like the day the Vorathian Empire's chokehold on the galaxy was finally broken. The instant their legendary 7th Fleet was turned into nothing more than cosmic vapor, their entire corrupt system started to crumble, and the very first world to rise up was ours, Draxus. For generations, they had done everything in their power to crush our warrior spirit, but they never succeeded. The second we got the news, we, politely, showed their officials to the nearest airlock and proudly declared ourselves a free planet. We had kept the blueprints for our old warships hidden away for over a century, just waiting for a day like this. In that moment, a revolution was ignited. Thaxia, Plen, Yalen, a dozen other worlds saw our courage and decided to follow, their own cries for freedom echoing ours across the stars. On some planets, the occupying soldiers just packed their bags and disappeared into the night. On others, the local Vorathian garrisons made a final, hopeless stand, unable to accept that their empire was gone. The empire tried to clamp down on the chaos, of course. They dispatched what few ships they had left to crush the rebellions, but it was like trying to stop 1,000 leaks in a massive dam using only your fingers. Their military was stretched so thin it was just sad. In only 3 months, they lost control of half their territory. The planets that did remain loyal immediately turned on each other, as every power-hungry commander suddenly decided he should be the new emperor. The same species that had conquered 17 different civilizations was now eating itself alive from the inside. And the Galactic Council? They became a complete and total joke. They were already a laughingstock for being so clueless about the humans, and this was the final nail in the coffin. Before long, nobody even bothered to show up for the meetings anymore. The giant council station, which was once a symbol of galactic unity, turned into a ghost town. The few politicians who did attend just sat around pointing fingers at each other while the galaxy burned. I heard the Thaxian counselor once gave a passionate speech to a room filled with nothing but empty seats. He said, "We have failed. We stood by and let the Vorathayans build an empire on a foundation of fear, and we had the nerve to call it stability. We called it peace, but it was a peace enforced by the barrel of a gun. And the very second someone looked right down that barrel and refused to flinch," he continued, "the entire illusion came crashing down." A military observer from my homeworld, Draxus, was standing in the back of the room and just nodded slowly. "It's an arms race now," the observer muttered to himself. "Every species is scrambling to build up its fleet, trying to reverse engineer what the humans did, desperately searching for the secret to how they defeated the most powerful military in history. Everyone is terrified that they'll be the next target on some new conqueror's list." The Thaxian just sighed. And who could possibly blame them? The humans taught the galaxy 2 incredibly harsh lessons. A massive fleet is worthless without a brilliant plan, and in the end, the only one you can ever truly rely on is yourself. After humanity delivered that galactic wake-up call, a strange, tense quiet settled over everything. Trust was a luxury nobody could afford anymore, and absolutely no one trusted the Council. How could they have possibly overlooked a civilization with that kind of firepower hiding right under their noses? Our Draxian ambassador had no good answers. While the rest of the galaxy descended into chaos, the human sector went completely dark. They basically put up a 50-light-year keep out sign around their solar system, and nobody was foolish enough to test them on it. Our best long-range sensors started detecting odd things happening out there. Massive structures were being assembled in orbit around Jupiter. Strange energy signatures were pulsing from Saturn. An entire civilization was humming with an unbelievable level of activity, yet not a single ship ever crossed the border of their self-imposed quarantine. The rumors started to spread like wildfire. Were they building a fleet of gigantic colony ships to flee the galactic chaos? Were they constructing planet killers to hold everyone else hostage? Or were they creating something so fundamentally new, so unbelievably powerful, that it would make their last victory seem like a child's temper tantrum? The scariest part was that nobody knew, and nobody was dumb enough to fly over and ask. Well, almost nobody. A small survey ship from the plant species made that one. Fatal error. They were searching for new worlds to colonize and drifted a little too close, about 51 light-years from Earth. There was no warning shot, no automated, "you are entering a restricted zone" hail. There was only a silent flash in the darkness as hidden defense platforms awoke from a 20-year sleep and tore the ship to pieces with railgun fire. All 37 souls on that ship were gone in less than a second. The message couldn't have been clearer. Earth was not playing games. Stay away. Permanently. Over on Vexith, one of the last surviving pieces of the old empire, the remaining military commanders were in a state of absolute panic. They had lost all contact with 17 of their fleets. Their economy was in a catastrophic freefall. A brutal civil war was tearing apart what little territory they had left. But the one thing that truly kept them awake at night was Earth. "What's to stop them from coming to finish us off?" one commander asked, his voice shaking. "What if they see how weak we are and decide to complete the job?" "They won't," Admiral Thraxus sighed. He was one of the few high-ranking officers to survive the political purges that followed the Seventh Fleet's destruction. "The humans told us exactly what they want. They want to be left alone. As long as we keep our distance, they couldn't care less what happens to us." "But what happens when the Draxians come looking for revenge?" another commander shot back. "Will the humans step in to save us then?" Thraxus let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Save us? Were you not listening to Representative Chen's broadcast? She made it perfectly clear that Earth is staying out of everyone else's business. We are completely on our own. We dug this grave for ourselves the day we underestimated them, and now we get to lie in it." He pulled up a star chart, and a massive red sphere glowed ominously where human space was marked. That 50-light-year bubble around Earth wasn't just a boundary, it was a defiant message to the entire galaxy. For generations, every species had been crushed under the boot of a galactic empire, but humanity, the ultimate underdogs, had just won an impossible war. You won't believe what they did next. "The humans didn't just win," Thraxus whispered, his voice full of awe. "They proved you don't need a massive empire to be safe. They proved you can go it alone." And now, everyone else was scrambling to learn that same lesson. But in the dead of space, far from prying eyes, a secret meeting was underway. Representatives from 7 species, including my own, the Draxians, gathered on a cloaked ship. Our governments didn't even know we existed. We called ourselves the Liberation Coalition, and we had a daring plan to forge a new future together. Our delegate spoke first, his voice firm. "We all know the score. The Varathian Empire is dust. The Galactic Council is a joke. And the humans taught us that real strength is the only thing that guarantees your freedom. The problem is, we're not Earth. We don't have 40 years in a unified world to prepare for the next nightmare." The Thaxian representative shot back. "So we'll do it as a team. We'll pool our resources, share our tech, and build a defensive alliance so strong that no one ever gets the idea to build another empire." But the Plen delegate was trembling. "What about the humans? What if they see our new alliance and decide we're the next threat?" With unshakable confidence, our Draxian answered, "Then our actions will prove them wrong. We will show them nothing but respect for their space. No flybys, no spy probes, not a single ship will cross that line. We will make it crystal clear that we want the exact same thing they do, the freedom to live in peace and control our own destiny." Over the next few months, the Liberation Coalition began to grow in secret. More worlds joined our cause, sharing ship designs and coordinating factory output. We started to mimic human strategy, building smaller and automated defense platforms and rugged, simple systems, not the delicate, overly complex junk the Empire loved. We studied the records of the war for the Sol system like it was a sacred text, trying to reverse engineer every piece of their genius. But we did something the humans never had to. We started to trust each other again. We shared everything, forging an alliance based on cooperation, not conquest. We were finally becoming what the Galactic Council only ever pretended to be, a true partnership of equals, working together for our shared defense. Meanwhile, on Earth, Representative Chen watched the galactic intelligence reports flicker across the main screen at Unified Defense Command. "The galaxy is hitting the reset button," her intel chief said. "The Varathian Empire is history. Their old territories are tearing each other apart in civil wars, and about 15 different species have formed their own little alliances. The biggest one calls itself the Liberation Coalition, ma'am. They're using our own playbook against anyone who looks at them sideways." A small smile touched Chen's lips as she stared at the holographic map. "Good. Let them. It's about time they learned to stand on their own 2 feet. Isn't that what this was all for? A galaxy of free peoples, not a new set of planets bowing to a new master." A general standing beside her shifted nervously. But what if they become too powerful? What if they unite the rest of the galaxy against us? Chen just smiled. She swiped her hand and the screen changed, showing a breathtaking montage of human achievement. Cities floating gracefully in high orbit, asteroids hollowed out like beehives for their minerals, fusion plants turning the moons of Jupiter into miniature suns, and shipyards, larger than anything the galaxy had ever conceived, were birthing the next generation of humanity's defenders. The lesson was for them, or the future was for us. "Let them try," she said, her voice as cold and vast as the void itself. "We ripped the Vithayan's 7th Fleet to pieces in 14 minutes, and that was with ships we designed 40 years ago. Do you honestly think we've been doing nothing for the last 6 months? Do you think that was the best we could do?" She expanded the display, revealing ship designs with impossible engines and weapon systems that made their legendary war-winning fleet look like museum artifacts. "The Varathians made a classic mistake," Chen stated plainly. "They thought the war would be won by whoever had the most expensive toys. But victory never goes to the wealthiest. It goes to the most prepared, the most clever, the ones who simply refuse to lose. We spent 4 decades getting ready for them. We've spent the last 6 months getting ready for everybody else." A young officer, his voice shaking just a little, dared to ask, "Ma'am, with all due respect, some of us worry we're preparing for the wrong future. The galaxy isn't just a war zone anymore. New alliances are forming. People are finding better ways. Maybe we should stop hiding. We could be a part of that." Chen turned to face the young man, and for a moment, a hint of warmth thawed the ice in her eyes. "I understand that feeling, I truly do. But our policy of non-interference exists for a damn good reason. The second we get involved in galactic politics, we paint a giant target on our backs. Every other power will see us as either a weapon to be used or a threat to be removed. We'd be dragged from one war to the next, bleeding out for other people's problems." She walked to the main viewport, gazing down at the beautiful blue and green swirl of Earth. "Our own species spent centuries killing each other over imaginary lines on maps, different gods, and patches of dirt. We almost burned this beautiful home to a cinder with our own bombs. It took an enemy from the stars to finally make us work together. That unity is the most precious thing we have, and it is unbelievably fragile. We cannot risk it shattering by getting tangled up in the galaxy's endless conflicts." "So we do nothing?" the officer asked, his voice now a whisper. "We just stand by and watch while a new empire rises to crush them?" "We do far more than nothing," Chen corrected him gently. "We protect our home. We hold on to the strength and freedom we paid for with our own blood. We are the living proof that a species can survive this savage universe by relying on itself. We are leading by example, not by command. You don't have to conquer the galaxy to be safe. You just need the will to build your own walls and the firepower to make sure no one can ever knock them down." She settled back into her command chair, her eyes tracking the data streams on the main screen. "Now, look at this," she said, her voice firm again. Far out on the edge of their claimed territory, something incredible was happening. 3 new alliances had sprung up in the last month alone, forged from the wreckage of the Varathian Empire. Species that had been blood enemies for generations were now sharing technology and planning joint defense pacts, figuring out how to stand on their own. "It's working," she whispered to herself. "They're learning." Her intelligence chief was skeptical. For now, alliances like that are brittle. What happens when old feuds over a moon or a mining claim flare up again? Chen just shrugged. "Then they'll handle it. It's not our problem. Earth has everything we need. The rest is up to them." "We now control 17 star systems," she reminded everyone in the room, gesturing to the glowing map. "That's more than enough space for us to expand for the next 1,000 years. We have the resources, the territory, and the military might to guarantee our independence. That is the only thing that matters." She could feel the doubt radiating from some of them. "I know what you're thinking, that this is selfish. But what's the alternative? If we get involved, how long until we're fighting someone else's war?" How long until they start seeing our fleet not as our shield, but as their sword? Our founders gave us one clear directive, she went on. We fight for our survival, not to build an empire. We protect what is ours, and only what is ours. By sticking to that one simple rule, they would never become the monsters they had just defeated. They would never become another galactic bully, imposing their will on others for some twisted version of peace. As weeks turned into months, the galaxy began to heal itself without a single ship or decree from Earth. A determined new liberation coalition grew to include 23 species, becoming a major power in its own right. The old Varathian warlords were too busy with their own civil wars, bleeding each other dry. New trade routes hummed with activity, connecting worlds that had been isolated for centuries. And through it all, Earth remained a ghost, utterly silent on all galactic channels. No one came in and no one went out. The humans had simply walked off the galactic stage, leaving everyone else to wonder what terrifying power they were building behind their quiet borders. Some called it the greatest missed opportunity in history. With human leadership and tech, a better, fairer galaxy could have been built from the ashes. But others saw it as the ultimate act of wisdom. By refusing to play the great game of empires, humanity could never be corrupted by it. But on one point, everyone came to agree. The galaxy was never the same again. The collapse of the Varathian Empire was proof that no one, no matter how powerful, was untouchable. Earth's stunning victory showed that sheer willpower and brilliant tactics could shatter superior technology any day of the week. And humanity's quiet retreat from the galactic stage showed that you don't have to rule the board to win the game. In the end, Earth achieved exactly what it had always wanted: security through its own strength, and peace earned by sending one very clear message: leave us alone or you will regret it. The galaxy learned to give that quiet little corner of space a very, very wide berth. And so, the rest of the galaxy learned to keep its distance. Back in the command center, Representative Chen lit a small, proud smile across her face as she looked over the latest intelligence briefs. The strategy had worked perfectly. Earth was secure. Humanity was free. The rest of the galaxy, for better or worse, could figure things out for itself. "Ma'am," an aide said, approaching her station. "It's the Liberation Coalition on the line again. They're asking for another diplomatic meeting. They want to know if we'd be willing to share some of our defensive technology." Chen replied without even glancing up from her screen. "Send them the same old response. Our stance has not changed. We appreciate them respecting our borders, but we have no interest in alliances or in sharing our tech." And that's when Earth sent its reply, not with words, but with action. The woman watching the approaching fleet from a quiet room in Colorado simply said, "Now." In the blink of an eye, the primitive satellites shimmered, their flimsy solar panels folding away to reveal weapons that defied physics. The tiny space station bloomed like a deadly flower, its core glowing with terrifying energy. That's when the aliens realized their mistake. The humans hadn't been splashing in the shallows. They'd been building a fortress beneath the surface. The Varathian Empire, a dynasty that had terrorized the galaxy for 300 years, was completely erased from existence in 14 minutes. 14. Less time than it takes to brew a pot of coffee. And that was the only lesson the galaxy ever needed. Humanity taught them that the universe only respects one thing: strength. Alliances fail and treaties are just paper. The only thing you can count on is what you build yourself. Earth sent one message that day, and it was the last one they ever needed to send: stay away. And the galaxy, having finally learned some common sense, did exactly that.